They made me eat leftovers in storage room, then my Michelin inspector badge fell out. What if your own sister's betrayal became the catalyst for reclaiming your power and finding your true self? Hey, my name is Evelyn. I never thought I'd be betrayed by someone I loved, especially not in front of so many people. The clatter of plates and the hum of laughter filled the air of La Belle Étoile, the upscale restaurant where my sister, Claire, worked as the head chef. It was supposed to be a celebration, her big night. The one she'd been dreaming of since we were kids, sneaking bites of our mother's coq au vin. I'd come to support her, to cheer her on, as the restaurant buzzed with anticipation for a rumored Michelin inspector visit. But as I stood there, clutching a plate of cold, congealed leftovers in the dim light of the storage room, I realized how wrong I'd been about her. About everything. It started innocently enough. Claire had invited me to the restaurant's grand reopening after a major renovation. "Evelyn, you have to come," she'd said over the phone, her voice bubbling with excitement. "It's going to be magical, and who knows, maybe you'll get to see me earn that Michelin star." I'd laughed, proud of her, and promised to be there. I'd even tucked my Michelin inspector badge into my purse, not because I was on duty, but because I wanted to feel a part of her world, even if just in secret. No one knew about my job, not even Claire. I'd worked hard to keep it that way, savoring the anonymity that let me slip into restaurants unnoticed, judging them purely on their merits. But when I arrived, something felt off. Claire greeted me with a tight smile, her eyes darting to the other guests, food critics, local celebrities, and well-dressed regulars. "Evelyn, you made it," she said, but her hug was quick, perfunctory. Before I could respond, she whisked me toward the back, away from the glittering dining room. "We're swamped tonight," she explained, her tone clipped. "You'll be more comfortable in the storage room. It's quieter." I blinked, confused, but followed her through the swinging kitchen doors, past the clanging pots and sizzling pans, to a cramped, musty room stacked with crates of vegetables and jars of preserved lemons. "Here," she said, thrusting a plate of mismatched leftovers into my hands, half-eaten portions of beef tartare, a soggy croquette, a smear of sauce that had long since lost its sheen. "We're saving the good stuff for the real guests." Her laugh was sharp, like broken glass, and it cut deeper than I expected. The other staff servers, sous chefs, nickered as they passed, their eyes flickering with amusement. I stood there, frozen, the plate heavy in my hands, my cheeks burning with shame. This wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was deliberate. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend it didn't hurt. "Claire, come on, this is a bit much," I said, my voice trembling. She shrugged, already turning away. "It's just food, Evie. Don't make a big deal out of it." But it wasn't just food. It was the way she'd dismissed me, the way she'd made me feel small in front of her staff, her guests, her world. I sat on a rickety stool, the plate balanced on my lap, and stared at the cold remnants. Each bite tasted like betrayal, like every moment we'd shared as sisters had been a lie. Then it happened. As I shifted to set the plate down, my purse slipped from my shoulder, spilling its contents across the floor. Lipstick, keys, and oh no, my Michelin inspector badge, glinting under the fluorescent light. One of the servers, a young woman with sharp eyes, froze mid-step. "Is that?" she started, her voice trailing off as she pointed. I scrambled to scoop it up, my heart pounding. But it was too late. The room went quiet, the air thick with curiosity. Claire turned back, her brow furrowed, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, fear, maybe, or something darker. "What's that, Evelyn?" she asked, her voice low, almost accusing. I shoved the badge back into my purse, my hands shaking. "Nothing," I lied, but the damage was done. The server's whisper spread like wildfire, and soon the kitchen staff were stealing glances, their murmurs growing louder. I felt exposed, raw, like a wound laid bare. Claire's expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. "You should go," she said, her tone colder than the leftovers still sitting on my plate. "This isn't the place for you tonight." Left the storage room, my steps heavy, my mind reeling. As I pushed through the back door into the cool night air, I realized I had a choice. I could let this moment define me, let Claire's betrayal, her casual cruelty, sink into my bones and stay there. Or I could do something about it. I could take control of my story, my life, my power. But what would that look like? Would I confront her, expose her, or walk away entirely? I didn't know yet, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. Standing there in the alley, the distant hum of the restaurant fading behind me, I felt the weight of that unresolved question pressing against my chest. Will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? The alley behind La Belle Étoile smelled of grease and forgotten dreams, and as I stood there, the cold night air biting at my skin, I couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, her tight smile, her dismissive shrug, the way her laughter had sliced through me. It wasn't just that moment in the storage room that stung. It was the weight of all the smaller betrayals, the ones I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself they didn't exist, but they did, and now, with my Michelin inspector badge burning a hole in my purse, they were clawing their way to the surface. Demanding to be seen, I started walking, my heels clicking against the uneven pavement. Not sure where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay still. My mind drifted to our childhood, to the moments I'd once cherished but now saw through a sharper lens. Claire and I had grown up in a small house filled with the scent of simmering sauces and fresh bread. Our mother, a single parent with a knack for cooking, had taught us both to love food, not just eating it, but understanding it, respecting it. Claire was the bold one, always experimenting, tossing in extra spices, breaking rules to create something new. I was quieter, more precise, savoring the way a perfectly balanced dish could tell a story. We'd been a team, or so I thought. But there were cracks, even then, like the time Claire entered a local baking contest when we were teenagers. I'd spent days helping her perfect her lemon tart recipe, staying up late to test crusts, tweaking the curd until it was just right. When she won, the whole town cheered, and I was so proud I could have burst. But at the award ceremony, when the judge asked who'd helped her, Claire just smiled and said, "Oh, I did it all myself." I stood in the crowd, my smile frozen, my heart sinking. It was a small thing, I told myself. She didn't mean it. But the sting lingered, a tiny splinter in my soul. There were other moments too. The way she'd borrow my ideas for her school projects, passing them off as her own. The time she forgot to invite me to her first big dinner party as a sous chef, only to laugh it off later with "Oh Ev, you wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway." Each one was a paper cut small, sharp, and easy to ignore until you realized how much you were bleeding. I'd always excused her, chalking it up to her ambition, her drive. Claire was the star, and I was happy to be her shadow, or so I thought. But that night in the storage room, with the cold leftovers and the snickers of her staff, something shifted. It wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was about me, about how I'd let these moments pile up, how I'd let myself shrink to make her shine. I stopped walking, my breath catching in my throat. I was standing in front of a small cafe, its warm lights spilling onto the street, and for a moment, I envied the people inside, laughing over steaming cups of coffee. They seemed so unburdened, so free. When had I stopped feeling like that? I thought about my job as a Michelin inspector, a secret I'd kept even from Claire. It was my one rebellion, my way of carving out a space that was mine alone. I loved the work, the quiet power of walking into a restaurant unnoticed, tasting every dish, judging it not just on flavor but on heart, on intention. It was a role that demanded precision, fairness, and an unflinching eye. But it was also lonely. I couldn't share it with anyone, not even my sister, because I knew she'd find a way to make it about her. And maybe, deep down, I was afraid she'd diminish it, just like she'd diminished me. The badge incident in the storage room had cracked that secrecy wide open. I could still hear the server's whisper, see the flicker of suspicion in Claire's eyes. Did she know? Did she guess? The thought made my stomach churn. If she found out, what would she do with that knowledge? Would she use it to hurt me again? To twist my one private victory into something small and insignificant? I didn't want to believe she was capable of that. But the leftovers, the laughter, the way she'd sent me away, they all told a different story. I started walking again. Faster this time, as if I could outrun the memories. But they followed me, each one heavier than the last. There was the time Claire forgot to tell me about our mother's hospital visit until it was too late for me to say goodbye. The way she'd brushed off my tears with, "You're too sensitive, Evie." The countless dinners where she'd talk over me, her voice louder, her stories bigger, until I felt like a ghost at my own table. These weren't just moments, they were wounds, scars I'd carried without acknowledging, and now they were raw, aching, impossible to ignore. My apartment, my hands were trembling. I dropped my purse on the floor, the badge spilling out again, mocking me with its quiet power. I sank onto the couch, staring at it, and felt a question rise up, sharp and unyielding. Can I confront the hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? I didn't have an answer, not yet. But the weight of those betrayals, the years of silence, pressed against me, demanding something: action, truth, or maybe just the courage to finally see myself clearly. The couch felt like quicksand, pulling me deeper into the weight of my own thoughts. I sat there, staring at the Michelin inspector badge glinting on the floor, its edges catching the dim light of my living room. It was more than a piece of metal, it was proof of my worth, my competence, my ability to see the world clearly and judge it fairly. And yet, I'd let Claire's actions, her casual cruelties, make me question that. The memory of her laughter in the storage room, the plate of cold leftovers, the way her staff's eyes had danced with mockery at all, burned in my chest, a fire I couldn't ignore anymore. I was done being the shadow. I was done being silent. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something new: resolve. I stood up, my legs shaky but my mind clear. I wasn't going to let this moment pass, let it become another buried wound. Claire's betrayal wasn't just about that night, it was the culmination of years of dismissal. Of her taking pieces of me and leaving me to pick up the scraps. But I wasn't powerless. I was Evelyn, a Michelin inspector, someone who walked into rooms and changed fates with a single review. I had power, even if I'd spent too long hiding it. It was time to stop shrinking, to stop letting her define me. It was time to act. The decision came like a spark, sudden and bright. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo of hurt and hesitation. I paced my apartment, the badge now clutched in my hand, its weight grounding me. My mind raced with possibilities. I could confront Claire directly, lay bare every slight, every wound, and demand answers. I could use my position as an inspector to expose the flaws in her precious restaurant, to show her that her world wasn't as perfect as she thought. Or I could walk away entirely, cut her out of my life and build something new, something mine. Each option felt like a door, and I wasn't sure which one I'd step through. But the act of choosing felt like freedom. I stopped pacing and sat at my kitchen table, pulling out a notebook. Writing had always been my way of making sense of things, of untangling the knots in my heart. I started jotting down memories, not just the storage room, but every moment Claire had made me feel small. The baking contest, the forgotten hospital visit, the dinner parties where I'd been an afterthought. Seeing them on paper made them real, undeniable. But it also made me see something else. I'd let her do this. I'd stayed quiet, smiled through the hurt, told myself it didn't matter. That was my fault, not hers. And that realization was both painful and liberating. I couldn't change the past, but I could change what came next. I thought about my work as an inspector. Every restaurant I visited was a story, a chef's passion, a team's effort, a moment captured in flavors and textures. I'd learned to see through facades, to taste the truth in every dish. Why hadn't I applied that same clarity to my own life? Claire's restaurant, La Belle Étoile, was her pride, her identity. But I'd seen the cracks that night, the rushed service, the uneven plating. The way her staff's loyalty seemed more performative than genuine. I could walk back in there, not as her sister, but as an inspector. I could hold her accountable, not out of spite, but because it was right. Because I was done letting her slide. But the thought of using my badge like that made my stomach twist. It felt like a betrayal, not of Claire, but of myself, of the integrity I'd worked so hard to maintain. My job was about fairness, not revenge. Still, the idea lingered, tempting me with its power. I could walk into La Belle Étoile unannounced, order a full meal, and write a review that would shake her world. Or I could confront her privately, tell her I knew what she'd done, that I wasn't invisible anymore. Both paths scared me, but they also thrilled me. For the first time, I felt like I had options, like I wasn't just reacting to her story but writing my own. I closed the notebook, my heart pounding. The badge sat on the table now, a silent challenge. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something better, a decision. I was going to take control, not just of this moment, but of my life. I wasn't sure how it would unfold, whether I'd face Claire head-on, use my professional power, or find another way entirely. But I knew I couldn't hesitate, not this time. The question lingered, sharp and urgent. Can I find the courage to change my life, or will I hesitate when it matters most? The decision to act was like a match struck in the dark. It illuminated everything, but it also burned. Sitting at my kitchen table, the Michelin inspector badge gleaming under the lamplight, I felt a quiet intensity settling over me. I wasn't the Evelyn who'd slunk out of La Belle Étoile's alley, humiliated and unseen. I was someone new, Someone who could choose her own path. And the path I was leaning toward was one Claire wouldn't see coming. Revenge wasn't a word I'd ever associated with myself, it felt too sharp. Too cold, but now, it sat in my mind, polished and precise, like a well-sharpened knife. I didn't want to hurt her, not exactly. I wanted her to see me, to feel the weight of what she'd done, and I was going to make sure she did. I opened my notebook again, the pages already filled with the raw edges of my pain. Now, I turned to a fresh page and began to plan. If I was going to confront Claire, it had to be deliberate, calculated, not some impulsive outburst that she could dismiss with a laugh. I knew her weaknesses, her pride, her obsession with La Belle Étoile's reputation, her need to be admired. Those were the levers I could pull, but I had to do it carefully. My role as a Michelin inspector gave me power, but it also came with rules. I couldn't just storm in and wield it like a weapon. Whatever I did had to be fair, professional, and most importantly, undeniable. The first step was to return to La Belle Étoile, but not as Evelyn, the overlooked sister. I'd go as an inspector, anonymous and impartial, just another diner in the crowd. I'd book a table under a false name, one Claire wouldn't recognize. I'd order a full tasting menu, observe every detail: the service, the plating, the flavors, the heart of the restaurant. I'd write a review that was honest but unsparing, one that would force Claire to confront her own shortcomings, not out of malice, but because it was the truth. If La Belle Étoile wasn't the flawless gem she thought it was, she needed to know. And if it was, well, I'd give credit where it was due. But I doubted that would be the case. I'd seen too much that night in the storage room: the carelessness, the arrogance, the way her staff mirrored her dismissive attitude. I started mapping it out. I'd need to call the Michelin office to confirm I could review La Belle Étoile without a conflict of interest. It was a gray area. Claire was my sister, but I'd never disclosed that to Michelin. And our estrangement made it easier to argue for impartiality. I'd request a solo assignment, no colleagues to complicate things. I'd dress plainly, nothing to draw attention, and I'd arrive midweek, when the restaurant was busy but not chaotic. I'd take notes discreetly, cataloging every moment, from the greeting at the door to the final bite of dessert. If Claire was there, I'd watch her, see if she suspected anything. If she didn't, all the better. The review would speak for itself. But there was another part of the plan, one that felt riskier, more personal. I wanted to confront Claire directly, not just through a review. I wanted her to know it was me, to see the sister she'd underestimated, standing tall. Maybe after the review was published, I'd walk into her restaurant again, this time with my badge in plain sight. I'd tell her about the years of slights, the way her laughter had cut me, the way she'd made me feel invisible. I'd tell her I was done letting her define me. The thought made my heart race, not with fear, but with anticipation. It was a fantasy I hadn't dared entertain before, but now it felt possible. I spent hours refining the details. I researched La Belle Étoile's menu online, noting the dishes Claire was proudest of: her signature lobster bisque, her deconstructed tarte tatin. I'd order those, test them against her reputation. I checked the restaurant's recent reviews, too, scouring food blogs and social media. There were cracks, just as I'd suspected: complaints about inconsistent service, rushed dishes, a certain coldness in the atmosphere. Claire's charm had carried her far, but charm wasn't enough for a Michelin star. I knew that better than anyone. As I wrote, doubts crept in. What if the review backfired? What if Claire found out it was me and turned it against me, accusing me of bias or sabotage? What if the restaurant was better than I expected, and I had to write a glowing review? The thought made me pause, my pen hovering over the page. I didn't want to destroy her just to make her see me. But what if this plan left me feeling hollow instead of whole? What if revenge wasn't the answer I thought it was? I pushed the doubts aside, focusing on the steps ahead. The plan was set, the reservation would be made, the review would be written. But the question lingered, sharp and unyielding. Will I feel victorious when it's over, or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? The moment I stepped into La Belle Étoile, I felt the air shift, as if the restaurant itself knew I wasn't the same Evelyn who'd left in shame. I'd booked the table under the name Ms. Laurent, a nod to our mother's maiden name, a secret jab Claire wouldn't catch. Dressed in a simple black dress, my hair pulled back, I blended into the crowd of well-heeled diners. My Michelin inspector badge tucked safely in my clutch. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady as I took my seat near the back, where I could see the kitchen's swing doors and the flurry of servers. moving like dancers in a tightly choreographed routine. This was it, the night I'd take back my power. The server, a young man with a practiced smile, handed me the menu. I ordered Claire's signature dishes, the lobster bisque, the duck confit, the deconstructed tarte tatin. Each choice was deliberate, a test of her skill, her heart, her reputation. As I waited, I scanned the room. The dining area sparkled with crystal chandeliers and crisp white linens. But I noticed the details I'd been trained to catch: a waiter's rushed steps, a table left uncleared too long, a faint strain in the staff's smiles. Claire was nowhere in sight, but I could feel her presence in the kitchen, her energy driving the chaos behind those doors. The bisque arrived first, its aroma rich and promising. I took a spoonful, letting the flavors unfold, creamy, briny, with a hint of tarragon. It was good, but not transcendent. The texture was slightly grainy, the seasoning a touch heavy-handed. I jotted notes in my small notebook, hidden beneath the table, my pen moving with the precision of a surgeon. The duck confit followed, its skin crisp but the meat oddly dry, as if it had been reheated too quickly. By the time the tarte tatin arrived, a delicate arrangement of caramelized apples and pastry shards, I was disappointed but not surprised. Claire's ambition was there, but her execution faltered, just like her treatment of me. Halfway through the meal, I saw her. Claire emerged from the kitchen, her chef's coat pristine, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She moved through the dining room, shaking hands, flashing that dazzling smile that had always won her allies. My pulse quickened as her eyes swept the room, but they didn't linger on me. I was invisible, just as I'd planned. For a moment, I wondered if I could leave it at this: a silent review, a professional judgment, no personal confrontation. But the memory of the storage room, the cold leftovers, the snickers of her staff, pushed me forward. I wasn't here just to critique her food. I was here to reclaim myself. When the meal ended, I paid the bill and slipped out before Claire could notice me. Back in my apartment, I wrote the review, my words sharp but fair. I noted the ambition of the menu, the elegance of the presentation, but also the inconsistencies, the rushed service, the uneven flavors, the lack of warmth in the experience. It wasn't a hatchet job. It was the truth, distilled through years of training. I sent it to the Michelin office, knowing it would be published anonymously, but I wasn't done yet. The next evening, I returned to La Belle Étoile, this time as myself. No reservation, no disguise, just Evelyn with her badge pinned openly to her coat. The hostess hesitated, recognizing me from that humiliating night, but I walked past her, straight to the kitchen doors. Claire was there, barking orders, her face flushed with the heat of the stoves. When she saw me, her expression froze, then hardened. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, wary. I held up the badge, letting it catch the light. "I was here last night, Claire, as an inspector." The kitchen went quiet, the staff pausing, mid-task. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, a flicker of fear giving way to defiance. "You're joking," she said, but her voice wavered. I shook my head. "I reviewed your restaurant. Fairly, you'll see it soon. But I'm not here about the review. I'm here because I'm done being your shadow. I'm done letting you make me feel small." Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, I saw her falter, her confidence cracking. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just stood there, my voice steady, my heart full of a calm strength I hadn't known I possessed. "You hurt me, Claire, for years, and I let you. But not anymore." I turned to leave, the badge still pinned to my coat, a symbol of my own worth. As I walked out, I felt the weight of her stare, but I didn't look back. The confrontation was over, but the aftermath loomed. Had I done enough? Had I said too much? The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Will I feel relieved after this, or will it leave me questioning everything? The days after the confrontation blurred together, each one heavy with the echo of my own words. The Michelin review was published a week later, and though it was anonymous, I knew Claire would suspect me. It wasn't a hatchet job, it praised La Belle Étoile's ambition but noted the inconsistencies, the lack of warmth, the rushed execution. Social media buzzed with reactions, some agreeing, others defending Claire's vision. I read every post, every comment, searching for her response, but she was silent. No calls, no texts, no furious confrontations. Just silence, louder than any argument we'd ever had. I waited for relief, for the satisfaction I'd imagined, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt untethered, like I'd cut a rope without knowing where I'd land. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt too small, too full of memories. I kept returning to my notebook, its pages now a map of my pain and my plan. But as I read over my words, I realized something. The story wasn't just about Claire's betrayals. It was about me, about the Evelyn who'd let herself be diminished, who'd hidden her strength behind silence. The badge, the review, the confrontation, they were steps. But they weren't the destination. One morning, I woke early, the city still quiet. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the badge in front of me. It wasn't just a symbol of my job anymore. It was a reminder of my own power, my ability to see clearly and act with purpose. I'd spent so long defining myself against Claire, her shadow, her foil, her victim. But I wasn't any of those things. I was Evelyn, a woman who could taste truth in a dish. Who could walk into a room and change its course. Who could choose her own story. I decided to write one last letter, not to Claire, but to myself. I poured out everything, the hurt, the anger, the years of feeling unseen. But I also wrote about my strength, my resilience, the way I'd faced her in that kitchen and walked away taller. I forgave myself for staying silent too long, for letting her wounds become mine. And I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry her anymore. When I finished, I sealed the letter and tucked it into my notebook, a quiet promise to let go. I didn't return to La Belle Étoile, but I heard through a colleague that Claire had taken the review hard. She'd made changes: new staff, a revised menu, a focus on consistency. Part of me was glad. Part of me didn't care. My life was no longer about her. I threw myself into my work, visiting restaurants with a renewed sense of purpose. Each review felt like a reclamation, a way of honoring my own voice. I started writing again, not just notes but essays. Stories about food and memory, about the way a single bite could hold a lifetime. I shared them online, under my own name. And the response, small but warm, felt like a homecoming. One evening, months later, I walked into a tiny bistro on the edge of town. One I'd never reviewed. The chef, a woman with kind eyes, brought me a plate of gnocchi, soft and perfect, dusted with sage and brown butter. As I ate, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't thinking about Claire, or the storage room, or the badge that had once defined me. I was just Evelyn, whole and present, savoring the moment. The past was still there, but it no longer held me. I was free, not because I'd won, but because I'd chosen myself. The question I'd carried, whether I was ready to move forward, had an answer now. I was ready, not because the pain was gone, but because I'd learned to carry it differently. I smiled at the chef, left a generous tip, and stepped into the night. My heart light, my future open. For the first time, I knew I was enough.